here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello, welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. We begin today with one of the biggest cyber attacks apparently on a nation's critical infrastructure to date. Last Friday, a hacker group called DarkSide deployed a ransomware attack on a pipeline system that carries nearly half of the U.S. East Coast fuel supply. Its operator, the private company Colonial Pipeline, then took the system offline in response to the virtual intrusion. Colonial Pipeline restarted operations on Wednesday evening as panic-induced gas shortages swept across the East Coast and Gulf Coast states. The White House said it's closely watching supply shortages. How did the pipeline attack unfold? What does it say about national security cyber vulnerabilities for all countries? And what should be the real appropriate responses? Let's bring in our panelists. For the latest on the Colonial Pipeline hack in San Francisco, Bruce McConnell, President and CEO of the East-West Institute and a distinguished fellow from the Stimson Center, who is also former Deputy Undersecretary for Cybersecurity, Department of Homeland Security. In Boston, Robert Siciliano, partner and head trainer at ProtectNowLLC.com. In Houston, last but not least, Andrew Lipao, president of Lipao Oil Associates, LLC. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. A lot of latest development. Understand the pipeline somewhat starting from the Colonial Pipelines, but we do not know the latest situation. Mr. Lipao, maybe as an insider, you know better than we do.
Well, Colonial Pipeline announced on their website that they had started the procedures to begin a staggered resumption of operations through the Colonial Pipeline system. Now, given that the Colonial Pipeline system is quite complex, consisting of 4 main lines, it's going to take them several days to restore operations and get back to near normal operations prior to this event happening. So we expect that by the end of this upcoming weekend, we will see the near normal resumption of service throughout the Colonial Pipeline system.
And what would that mean for the general access to oil and gas from the East Coast, Mr. Lipao, very briefly?
Well, what that means is that the refineries on the Gulf Coast will be able to deliver their product into the Colonial Pipeline system. At the same time, Colonial Pipeline delivers that product to terminals up and down the East Coast.
How much do we know about who was behind this?
So with the wild web, you have organized web mobs that are operating worldwide. You could have a number of individuals in parts of Asia, Russia, North America, South America, and in this particular case, they're seeing that there is Russian language in the code. And so from forensics investigations, they can see a similarity between other breaches, and this is representative of this particular cyber group.
And what is ransomware? Because this is so much being mentioned. It has a lot to do with the security of data. For a layman on the street, maybe you want to explain to us as well about that, Mr. Siciliano.
So ransomware is malicious software that essentially holds the data for ransom. Usually it encrypts that data in such a way where you have to pay, usually via Bitcoin, for a decryption key in order to get that data back.
All of this explained, let me go to you, Mr. McConnell. How do you see the real nature of this event? Did we see similar events before?
Absolutely. Where we saw in 2020, we saw about 2,400 events of ransomware in the United States. Those are the ones that we know about. There probably were others because people don't always announce them. And so it's not uncommon. This is a bigger one than we usually see, and it has had more societal effects. But my view is whenever we have a large, non-lethal cyber attack like this, it's helpful because it gets people more aware of the problem, and we're more likely to prevent them and respond properly in the future.
Mr. Lipao, what do we know about Colonial Pipeline. We do not know much about exactly how they operated since the warning was noticed, and what exactly happened, the timeline of it, and how this business was interacting both within its own security system and whether asking for help from others about its cybersecurity issue. How much do we know now?
Well, we still know very little because Colonial Pipeline has been very tight-lipped about exactly what happened.
Should they be
But,
tight-lipped though? It seems that if there is an emergency situation, state already being declared, shouldn't they give more information, or those information are only to authorities, not to the general public?
Well, the information that they've been tight-lipped about is what happened to the Colonial Pipeline computer system,
Yes.
how it happened, and what they were doing about it. As far as the public is concerned, Colonial Pipeline made the decision to shut down their entire pipeline system and secure their computers. Unfortunately, the consumer was paying the price of that lack of supply of gasoline, jet fuel, and diesel. And over the last 5 or 6 days, we've seen Colonial Pipeline eventually restore operations. We probably ought to assume that they were very much working hand in hand with various government agencies in order to solve the problem. But that information has yet to become public of exactly what Colonial Pipeline was doing to resolve the problem on a computer-wise basis over the last 5 days.
We're getting more information from every one of you. It's certainly very helpful. I go to you now, Mr. McConnell. You worked in the government, particularly on the cybersecurity issue, under such circumstances like before. What the government or federal agencies would ask players such as Colonial Pipeline to clarify, to submit, to communicate with at least the relevant departments?
Yeah, I think Colonial, not only would the government ask, but Colonial contacted the government, it's very likely, and asked for help in solving this problem. So the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, were both likely on the scene, working very closely with the company to investigate the crime and also to help them respond to it. So I think there's probably pretty good cooperation. As Andrew says, it's not been made public yet, but I think that's probably working pretty well on this particular incident. What's more interesting, of course, is how do we respond and stop this going forward in the future.
Talking about how to respond, according to the White House, President had been talking about executive order regarding cybersecurity infrastructure likely to be announced in the coming days. Now, Mr. McConnell, is that something new? What do you consider should be included in that executive order if it comes into being?
Well, the executive order, of course, goes way beyond ransomware.
Yes.
So it's not new. It's an enhancement of existing requirements and reporting. So a wide variety of things that need to be enhanced and made stronger. I think in the area of ransomware, particularly though, there are two things that would be good, whether they're in this order or not. One is that there should not be any safe havens for ransomware criminals. So as Mr. Siciliano was saying, there's some evidence that some of these criminals may be based inside, even though the internet is without borders, everybody's in some country. And the point is that countries have an obligation to shut down those operations when they're brought to their attention. And the second thing is that Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency operators need to be regulated and comply with anti-money laundering laws and things like that. So those are two things that would help.
How fast do you think, Mr. Siciliano, have we seen the governance system and the global governance system about cybersecurity? As far as I understand, there is still very little so far.
So we still have a ways to go. You know, there is no such thing as 100% security. It's not a destination. It's not a place you ever fully arrive
We're
to.
not asking
And
for 100% safety, sir. We are asking for at least some basic platform of cooperation among countries and also bring together some of the same benchmarks.
So, you know, I understand your point of view, but keep in mind that if the bad guys were really winning, the lights would be off right now. The banking systems would be liquidated, and you and I wouldn't be having this discussion because we'd be living in the dark. So the good guys actually are winning. The governments are cooperating with one another, and we are essentially live. If we were so behind the curve, you know, you'd see large major banks being broken into and liquidated on a daily basis. You'd see large swaths of the electrical grid going down on a regular basis. That's just not happening. So when you see breaches like this, it's alarming. There's no question about it. There's definitely more to do. But there are potentially millions of breaches that occur every single day, but none of them are big in such a way where it's completely collapsing our critical infrastructures.
Mr. Li Pao, even though you are an expert of the industry, oil industry, but how crucial is security for the industry now in the United States? And how do you look at your counterparts in different parts of the world, including, let's say, Middle East, Russia, South America, and also the users, such as China and some of the other countries?
Well, this event shows that no facility around the world is completely safe and is vulnerable to a cyber attack. Now, of course, this is a wake-up call here in the United States regarding other pipeline systems, refineries, the infrastructure grid of electricity or natural gas. And I'm sure that all of these industries are now examining their existing policies, procedures, their security arrangements to see that an event that happened to Colonial Pipeline will not happen to them. But we should keep in mind what happened here to Colonial Pipeline could easily happen to other countries and other facilities all around the world. If someone wants to try hard enough, they may find a way to enter into those computer systems.
I agree with you, Wei, that we need an international network of ransomware investigation teams with countries cooperating so we can work together on this problem. Nobody benefits from this. No country benefits from this. It's only the criminals.
Given the fact that cybersecurity is such a huge issue, shouldn't there be more concrete infrastructures worldwide? I'm not saying tribalism or a few countries, but rather worldwide be discussed in depth and implementations to be able to see through on this issue. Mr. McConnell.
There are some conversations about that. Some of them are about the rules, of course, of how countries should behave, but there are beginning to be discussions at the United Nations about whether there needs to be some international organization like the International Civil Aviation Organization or the International Atomic Energy Organization that would manage and do exactly as you suggest, coordinate responses and promote capacity for cybersecurity worldwide.
But we have geopolitics these days, probably even more than it used to be. Mr. McConnell, how realistic is it? Are we going to see real discussion, global governance regarding cybersecurity?
Well, I have to say I'm not that optimistic right now. I mean, if you look at the pandemic, which was our most recent and still is our most recent and current global crisis, the cooperation has not been that good. So I'm disappointed in our governments and in the people of the planet at not cooperating better on that issue. And there are other issues, climate, we're getting some progress there. Cybersecurity, you're right, we need to do more there.
Let me just ask every one of you, since it seems to me that all of you are devoting to the topic of building the right security infrastructure. What should be in this security infrastructure, Mr. Siciliano?
Public-private partnerships. There are tremendous technologies that are available.
Public-private
that,
partnership is the way to do it, but what are some of the categories we need to govern?
Well, certainly, as has already been discussed, if the bad guys can't get paid, if such payment methodologies such as Bitcoin are regulated in a way where you cannot, funnel or launder money in the result of a breach, in this case ransomware, then it would constrain criminals from being able to be funded. That right there is a really big one. And if and when all countries were to agree to that one thing, it would eliminate a lot of different crime.
I would add, Wei, that one of the things that we need to do is have all companies and all governments actually follow basic cybersecurity standards and kind of raise the bar. In other words, to make it more difficult for the attackers to be successful. So there are emerging standards in Europe and in the international realm that are starting to promulgate. Insurance companies can be helpful in promoting those. So that's an area where we need to sort of set the baseline of sound practices.
Mr. Li Pao.
If you want to stop ransomware, stop the flow of the money. And I would take it one step further, because this may lead to the ban of all digital currencies. If a digital currency provides anonymity, which really means money laundering can be quite successful through the use of these digital currencies, then you shut them down.
Well, it's interesting because, of course, the Chinese government is about to issue a state-sponsored, state-backed digital currency, and I think you'll see other sovereign currencies like that. So this period of private currencies may, like private currencies in 200 years ago, may go away, and we may get back to government digital currencies.
Very interesting, because we also see similar announcement coming from the U.S. side as well as to what is the role going to be about the government, the Federal Reserve, and also the digital currency in the U.S. And meanwhile, the competition between the traditional currency and the digital currency in the commercial world and also in the geopolitical world. It's a very interesting topic. But as they say, cannot throw out the child only when they're trying to throw out the water of the bathtub. So
you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right. Thank you so much. My English needs to be improved in that regard. But that is, I think, a relevant analogy to be used about digital currency and the other issues that we've been talking about. On the one hand, it's security. On the other hand, it's about new innovations and how to govern the new innovations, whether humans are smart enough to work together about new innovations. That's a test of our capability rather than the new innovations themselves.
I couldn't agree with you more, Ms. Chan, because we have always let technology get ahead of us as humans. We developed atomic energy and atomic weapons before we were ready to manage them, and cyber and information technology is the same, but we do need to get them under control, and we need to work together, and it is a big test for our species on the planet.
Mr. Siciliano.
It's interesting because the majority of the fraud that occurs today is as a result of the various technologies that have been implemented both personally and professionally, in business and personal lives, and it's all merely for convenience purposes. We were talking earlier about how 10, 30, 40 years ago, it would a human being, a man, would need to open and close various valves in order to have fuel flow from one place to another. Now it's all done electronically, and that man is not necessary, or that man is, or woman for that matter, is remote in a location hundreds of miles away. But the boots on the ground aren't there any longer. So it's all these conveniences that we have of digital currencies, online banking, remote work, and so forth, that facilitates that fraud. And all of, again, these conveniences, we've got to look at how they are affecting, the fraud for one, and ultimately, how we can take back more control and ultimately, reduce a certain level of fraud.
and also the nature of that control. That will be very interesting up to
Exactly,
debate.
yes. Thank you.
Mr. Li Pao?
Well, I'm offering my opinion, and a lot of people are going to debate whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. But one thing that I will say is, one can see over the past several decades as technology has improved, whether it's the computers or think about your flat screen TV or any other technology we have, it's really compressed the time frame that we've seen of developing something and implementing it in practice. And right now that could go even towards the pandemic and the development of a vaccine within 12 months. So this theme really carries on throughout society and around the world of the pace at which we're developing new things has accelerated over the last decades and hundreds of years. And it's the society is catching up with the implications of that happening.
With all the information that we have so far in the public domain, what do you think is the most important takeaway for you when you look at the latest incident? Mr. Li Pao, briefly.
Well, the most important takeaway is that, number one, facilities and infrastructure is still vulnerable. And number two is when government reacts to those infrastructure issues, sometimes they can exacerbate the situation by declaring emergencies, and the public runs out and does exactly what we don't want to see and encourages panic buying.
I see. Mr. Siciliano?
Yeah, I echo that sentiment as well. I think that the general public, consumers in general, citizens, need to be much more prepared for any catastrophic event, whether that is the grid going down for a day, a week, or even potentially a month or more, whether it's man-made or natural disaster, having gasoline, heat, food supplies, water. People in general need to be more prepared, because as we continually rely on technology and in the overall sense of stability fades, people are going to need to be able to be self-sufficient at some level, and they're just not.
All right. Finally, Mr. McConnell?
General takeaway from me, it's good this was a big but not lethal incident, so that will raise awareness, as Mr. Li Pao has said, and we need to have better cooperation, not only between public and private sector, but among countries.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us and helping us to understand much better about the latest. Bruce McConnell, Robert Siciliano, Andrew Li Pao. Really appreciate it. Thank you.